In the spring of 1910, when reputations mattered more than affection and carriages lined up outside chapels like proof of virtue, a woman in a pale blue gown stood alone in the rain. She was not a governess, not a spinster with embroidery in her lap, and certainly not a widow, though by noon she'd feel like one. The dress had been stitched by hand over weeks of silence, every seam pinned with duty. The veil was French lace, the bouquet, foxglove and freesia, chosen for color, not meaning. No one asked what she liked. Honora Whitcomb had not wept when the groom failed to arrive, nor when her mother collapsed beside the altar, nor when the note came folded twice and damp at the edges. Forgive me, I cannot. What she did instead, what no one expected, was step down the chapel steps and walk alone into town, dragging silk and scandal behind her like a train. The bells rang behind her still, long, slow, ceremonial, as if the ceremony were happening without her. Rain soaked the bodice within minutes. Her shoes sank into the gravel drive with each step, heels dragging clumps of earth. She didn't look back. A boy holding a jar of boiled sweets froze beside his father's cart. A dressmaker's apprentice peered through the seam of her front curtain. Someone whispered her name, Honora, like it was both a warning and a pity. She reached the village square just as a gust lifted the hem of her gown and made it slap wet against her ankles. She paused to fix it, fingers trembling. It wasn't the cold. It was the quiet. That's when she saw him. Beneath the sloped awning of Whitcomb's bookshop, a man stood still with his collar turned up against the rain. He didn't step forward, didn't wave or flinch, just watched. He hadn't changed in the way she expected. He'd thickened at the shoulders, carried more weight in his stance. But the stillness, the way he observed without asking, was exactly as she remembered. Nathaniel Blythe. Her hand hovered at her side. She let the skirt drop. The bouquet slipped from her grip and landed in the mud with a soft thud. She didn't stop walking. The caretaker's cottage had been used for storage since before she could remember. Kindling, trunks of moth-bitten linen, baskets of apples going soft in the dark. It was square, stone, low-ceilinged, with one crooked chimney and windows that refused to close all the way. The key had been left on the windowsill in the side kitchen, beside a folded note in her sister's hand. It's dry. That's all I can say for it. Her father hadn't spoken to her. He didn't have to. Everyone understood what this meant. The Whitcombs had needed that wedding. Charles Percival was not just a suitor. He was supposed to be the family's lifeline, his fortune, their name. Their arrangement had been as clear as their desperation. Now, with the groom gone and the whispers rising, Honora was no longer an asset. She was an embarrassment, a failed transaction. So her father sent her here, out of the house, off the books, out of sight. The cottage wasn't punishment exactly, but it was removal. It said, "You are not to be seen. You are not part of our solution anymore." She crossed the threshold without knocking and stood for a moment in the doorway, letting the wet air breathe in behind her. The door swung closed on its own, slow and reluctant. There was no fire, no warmth, a tin basin on a side table, a wool blanket folded stiff on the bed. The floor creaked with a sound that had no reason to stop. A trunk sat against the far wall, half open, with a folded gray skirt and two plain blouses inside. Nothing new, nothing hers. Likely left from some maid no one remembered, or placed there out of obligation, not kindness, no shoes, no brush, no letter, just the clothes of someone meant to be clothed, not welcomed. She peeled the gown away in silence. The fabric clung to her skin like it had forgotten it wasn't part of her. She left it draped over the back of a chair, blue silk, French lace, rain-sodden and ruined. Her hair had come loose in the storm. She let it fall. Money and few questions. Honora had accepted it. She could have lived with it. She might have even learned to be grateful. But he hadn't shown up. He had written 6 words and vanished. The bells had still rung. She pulled the stiff blanket around her shoulders and sat with her back against the wall, watching the fire try to live. She had only ever loved one man. Nathaniel Blythe, the stable boy who smelled of horses and hay, who read poetry aloud when no one else was near, who kissed her only once, beneath the orchard, and asked her to leave with him before the sun came up. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said anything. Her mother found out the next morning. Nathaniel was gone by supper. Honora had told herself he'd moved on, gone off to war, died maybe, or married someone else who didn't hesitate. But he had been in the village this morning, standing in the rain, watching her, not with pity, not with concern, with recognition. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. The fire popped. Somewhere outside, a bird called once and then fell quiet again. She hadn't said anything when she saw him. Not a glance, not a word. She had passed him as if she didn't remember, but her hands were still shaking. Later that afternoon she heard a knock. Not even a knock, really, just the sound of something set lightly on the doorstep. She opened the door. No one was there. Only a parcel, brown paper, tied with string. She bent slowly to pick it up, the wood of the stoop creaking beneath her. It was light, familiar in shape. She closed the door behind her and walked it to the table. The string unwound with one pull. Inside was a book, a battered, beautiful copy of The Woodlanders. She stared at it for a long moment before opening the cover. Inside, written in a hand she hadn't seen since she was 17, were her own notes. Ink faded, edges softened, thoughts scribbled in the margins from another life. She wants him to ask again, but he doesn't. Too proud. Too late. Maybe love isn't enough if no one says it out loud. She closed the book gently and held it to her chest. There had only ever been one copy. They used to pass it back and forth in the stable loft when the other girls were at piano lessons and no one was watching the hayloft stairs. That meant he hadn't just chosen it, he'd kept it, all this time. The fire crackled quietly behind her. Outside, the wind had shifted. She sat still for several minutes. Then, without rushing, she stood, pulled her shawl from the hook, no gloves, just herself. She walked the orchard path, head high, past the fieldstone fence, past the forge, past the low stream where boys used to fish in spring. She found him sitting on the old wall behind the blacksmith's, not reading, not working, just there, still. He stood when he saw her, hands tucked in his coat pockets. She didn't greet him. Instead, she held up the book. "You sent this," she said, voice steady. "I thought you should have it," he replied. "You kept it?" All this time, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was thick, but not sharp. She ran her fingers along the book's spine. "I thought you were dead. I wrote to you, from the front, from hospital after." She looked up at him slowly. "I never saw a single letter." He didn't speak, but something shifted in the set of his jaw, more memory than emotion. "My mother," she said. "She would have burned them." Nathaniel nodded once, not surprised, just deeply, bone-level tired. "I thought you chose him," he said. "I didn't choose anyone. You stayed. I was 17. You asked me to run. I did. I didn't know how." Neither spoke. A horse trotted somewhere beyond the orchard wall. The wind carried the scent of coal smoke from a cottage further up the lane. Honora closed the book in her hands. "I should have asked you to stay," she said, "and I should have waited." Still, no apology. Just the pieces of an old, broken future laid gently between them. "I'm in the caretaker's cottage," she added. "If you wanted to, come by." For tea, Nathaniel nodded once. "I would." She turned to go. He didn't follow. But for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel quite so alone as she walked home. He came 2 mornings later, just after the rain. No letter, no warning. Just the quiet thump of boots on stone and the dull clatter of a ladder resting against the cottage roof. Honora heard the noise while trimming the ends from a loaf of stale bread. She stepped to the window, half expecting one of the neighbor boys to be up to something, but it was him, Nathaniel. Jacket rolled to the elbows, one hand steadying the ladder, the other carrying a coil of rope and a canvas sack with tools. She didn't go out right away. She watched as he tested the shingles with one foot, his balance instinctive, like this kind of work had once lived in his muscles. He moved like someone who didn't need permission, but also didn't expect thanks. A few minutes later, she opened the door and leaned against the frame, arms crossed lightly. "You could have asked first," she called up. He glanced down with a half smile. Thought I'd give the roof a chance to greet me before you did. Charming. Leaking, too. She didn't argue. It had been dripping above the hearth since late March. She turned and went back inside. 20 minutes later, he knocked on the door, not to enter, just to say, "Boiling water." She passed him a tin mug without comment. He took it with both hands and sipped. The handle had been repaired with twine, and he ran his thumb over the spot before setting it down. "I remember this mug," he said. "You used to steal it from the stables. You always took the blue one. It was chipped. I thought you liked that." "I didn't." He smiled again, barely. Figures. They sat outside, not too close, not too far, the roof patched for now, the silence gentle. She let her hand rest around her own mug, warming her fingers. The wind was softer today, the kind that moved the leaves but didn't mean to. "You read it?" she asked finally. He looked over. "The book," she added. "The last time. Did you finish it?" He nodded once. "You stopped writing in the margins near the end." "I didn't know how it would end. I hoped it wouldn't." She looked at him then, full on, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't look away. There had been a summer once where she'd laughed without thinking. She remembered it now, the way it startled the orchard birds, how it made the horses twitch their ears. She didn't laugh that way now, but something close surfaced. "I walk past that tree sometimes," he said. "The one near the east orchard." She raised a brow. "The one you weren't supposed to climb. The one I kissed you under." The words didn't sting, not anymore. They came like an old tune, familiar, a little faded. She took another sip of tea. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Would you have come with me if I'd asked again?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Yes." Without hesitation, he nodded once, the wind catching the edge of his sleeve. "Then perhaps we still can," he said. The following Sunday she dressed without ceremony, a plain blue skirt, a cream blouse with slightly uneven cuffs. Her hair was pinned at the nape, no hat, no veil. She buttoned each fastening like she was sealing something behind her, not wearing something new. She left the cottage at 9:15. The walk to the church was familiar, but her shoes felt louder this time. Each step along the path from the orchard to the chapel doors landed with weight, not dread, but certainty. She did not come to kneel. She came to teach. The vicar had asked weeks before the wedding, "Would you consider a children's scripture hour, just for the little ones? You always had a way with them." She had said yes then, without thinking. The lesson was still hers. As she stepped through the chapel doors, the air inside stilled. Heads turned. A breath caught near the organ loft. The woman who had once overseen her trousseau whispered something behind a gloved hand. A man shifted uncomfortably in his pew, his eyes refusing to land on hers. Honora walked forward with her chin up, her shoes scuffing lightly against the stone aisle. She passed the spot where she'd once stood waiting for Charles Percival, and did not look at it. The children sat near the front, legs swinging, hymn books closed. She took her place beside them and opened her own with calm fingers. When she spoke, her voice carried, not loud, but full. Halfway through the lesson, the chapel door opened again, bootsteps, even, measured. Nathaniel. He removed his hat as he entered, walked past the last row of pews, past the whispers, past the discomfort, and sat beside her. He didn't reach for her hand, he didn't say a word, but he sat there, in the open, where anyone could see. The vicar, mid-sermon, paused only slightly. The congregation did not. Several heads tilted. One woman dropped her handkerchief. Honora could feel the heat of every eye behind her. She did not flinch. After the lesson, as the children were dismissed, a widow in a lilac shawl leaned toward her and whispered, "You were always too good for the lot of us." Honora turned her head slowly, not with pride, just acknowledgement. Nathaniel stepped aside to let her pass first. He held the chapel door, nothing more. Outside, the morning was brighter than it had been in weeks, not warm, but no longer cold. They didn't speak, not right away. He walked her to the bend in the path, just past the stone wall where wildflowers had started to peek through the cracks. They had passed the bakery, the green, and old Mrs. Hannigan with her gnarled cane. No one whispered this time. No one turned away. "I've never seen them look at anyone like that," she said. When she paused, he did too. I've never seen them look at anyone like that, she said. I have, he replied. She looked up. Once, he added. When you used to sit by the fence and read aloud to the horses. She smiled then. Not a grand smile, just a true one. They married beneath the orchard tree on a Tuesday, just after the last frost broke. No guests, no veil, no bouquet. Her mother stayed home. Her father said nothing, but her sister, who had once looked at her with nothing but embarrassment, left a note folded between two lengths of ribbon. You deserve something soft and someone who sees you. Nathaniel stood waiting. No coat of arms, no gold band. Just him. Calloused hands, a flask of tea. The quiet steadiness that had always felt more like safety than any chapel ever could. She wore a pale linen dress she'd stitched by hand. It caught slightly at the waist. She hadn't tried it on until the night before. It didn't matter. It was hers. The orchard had bloomed just in time. Blossoms fell like feathers. A breeze passed like music no one had to play. They stood across from each other, boots in the grass, hearts still scarred, but open. I don't want the years we lost, he said. I just want everyone from here on. She didn't waver, and I'll never let another word meant for me be silenced again. They didn't rush. He stepped closer. One hand came to her face, the other to the small of her back. She leaned in. And when they kissed, it wasn't shy, it wasn't grand. It was warm, long, the kind of kiss that says, "You're home now." Later they sat beneath the tree, shoulder to shoulder, sharing the last of the tea. And when they stood, they didn't return to the caretaker's cottage. They walked past the orchard fence, past the boundaries she was once told never to cross. Nathaniel's cottage stood just over the hill. Crooked roof, fresh laundry on the line, a new place to begin. She didn't say goodbye to the manor. She just let it fade behind her. For once, she didn't feel like someone who had been left. She felt like someone who had chosen to leave. And if someone ever made you feel like you weren't enough, too late, too damaged, too loud, too quiet, whatever they tried to hang on you, let this be your reminder. The version of life they offered you, that wasn't the whole story. Sometimes the right things take longer. Sometimes you're not behind. You're just becoming someone who won't settle for being half seen. The life you thought you missed, it might still be out there, calm, honest, warm, and waiting on no one's timeline but your own.